Welcome to Current Events in Context, Connecting Asian American History and Anti-Asian Racism. I'm your host, Kristina Kirtley. I'm a senior producer of education and youth engagement at the WNET Group, which is the public media company for the New York City metro area, so PBS. I'm joined today by Goulding and Freda Lin, the team behind YURI Education. Welcome, Freda and Kath. So at WNET, we've been following the events and senseless acts of violence that have occurred against the Asian American and Pacific Islander community in Georgia and New York and across the country. You know, over the past year, we've witnessed how words, fear, intolerance, and a lack of empathy have led to a rise in hate crimes, injustice, harassment, and bullying against the API community. This presentation, comes at a particularly challenging time in contemporary American life. Today, we'll share content and strategies to help answer students' questions and contextualize current events through a broader understanding of Asian American history. Before handing things over to Kath and Freda, I want to first introduce you to the WNET Group. So WNET is America's flagship PBS station, the parent company of New York's 13 and WLIW 21, and the operator of NJPBS, the statewide public media network in New Jersey. The mission of our team, Kids Media and Education at WNET, is to expand minds, ignite curiosity, and help children become confident and caring people. So we create classroom resources in connection to our national programs like American Masters, Great Performances, Nature, Cyber Chase, and the digital gaming series Mission US. We also produce the at-home learning series, Let's Learn and Camp TV, which are aired by stations across the country. All of our content is available on PBS Learning Media. If you're not familiar with it, PBS Learning Media is a free online site with high-quality, research-based, and standards-aligned resources drawn from critically acclaimed PBS programs and from expert content contributors like the National Archives and NASA. So we'd like to say that the resources on PBS Learning Media are purpose-built. And really what that means is we don't just segment long documentaries into smaller chunks for classroom viewing. Instead, we try to carefully watch each program and select 3 to 5 minute sort of teachable moments, and then use that to build out each resource. So the video clips are paired with support materials to create a package of content that can be used to enrich curriculum. The site, as you can see here, it automatically geolocates and provides state-specific standards for each resource. You can see that this page says it's for New York educators, and my local station is 13. It also has my name there in the corner. The site is organized by subject, grade, and standards, and the homepage always features timely highlighted resources. It's also worth noting that the website is fully integrated with Google Classroom, so it makes it a really useful tool for hybrid and remote learning. So now I'd like to hand things over to Kath Goulding and Freda Lin, who will introduce themselves and also provide some context and walk you through a variety of resources that are available on PBS Learning Media to help you connect Asian American history and anti-Asian racism. So I'm just going to click through our bio slides and hand it over to you, Kath and Freda.
Great. Thank you so much, Kristina, for that introduction. And welcome, everyone. Freda and I are both so heartened to see educators from all over the United States and the world joining us today. It means a lot to see you all here. Okay, so let's jump into our presentation today. So Freda and I are the co-founders of YURI Education Project, and we design educational resources, some of which you'll hear about today, on Asian American history and stories. We're named after the civil rights activist Yuri Kochiyama, who's pictured here. And if you're familiar with Yuri's story, we'd love to hear you participate in the chat. So I'm Kath Goulding, as I said, one of the co-founders, and I'm based in New York City, in Queens, not Brooklyn, actually, just moved. And I'm going to pass it over to my friend and co-founder, Freda Lin.
Hi, I'm Freda Lin, and I'm in San Francisco, but I did grow up on Long Island, New York, so it's just really surreal to be presenting something on a channel that I grew up watching, like Sesame Street and all of that on Channel 13. And I'm just really grateful that WNET has put this together. Kath and I have not seen resources like this when we were teachers, and it's just really amazing to be putting this all together for you. So hopefully this will be really helpful for all of you.
Absolutely. And as former public school teachers, both of us Asian American, we found that the stories at the heart of our own family histories and intellectual work were just not being taught in K through 12 classrooms. And that's why we founded YURI in 2018. Okay. All right. So on that note, we'd like to preview the 3 resources from PBS Learning Media that we're going to share with you today. So excited about these resources. Sounds like some of you are already familiar with them. The first one will be Unladylike 2020. The second, Mission US. I saw somebody say they love Mission US. And the Asian American series recently aired this past year. Okay, Freda, you want to go ahead? I'm going to pass it to you because you're going to build some context in for these resources.
Yes. So let me go to the next slide. So let's, before we start, let's just talk about what we mean by Asian American. It's a pretty big term that covers a lot of different people, over 30 different nationalities, ethnic groups, hundreds of different languages. And you'll just see a sampling on the right there of just some of those groups. So this is definitely not a definitive list, but it's something just to show you how diverse it is. And so sometimes, this word Asian American, this term, even though it hides some of the distinctive experiences and cultures and languages of these groups, it was mainly formed to unify Asian Americans together for things like what's going on in the country right now to combat anti-Asian racism and get better hate crime laws and things like that for political rights and so on and so forth, civil rights in the past. So this term is very important in that way. And at the same time, on the flip, obviously, people can also group us all together as one in terms of generalizing and stereotyping. So in that sense, it can be a detriment. But ultimately, this term was developed during the civil rights movement in the 60s, and it's how we're referring to ourselves. Okay, so the first thing we wanted to ask you a question about is, what did you learn about Asian American history in school? We've noticed a lot of Asian American educators are asking their students what they've learned. So go ahead and think about in your K through 12 schooling, whether, no matter how small the anecdote is, how long of a list, you can list everything you've learned. We're just curious what you have learned about Asian American history.
Yeah,
go ahead and type that in the
Tran
chat.
says, oof, what a loaded question. We see the Japanese American incarceration camps.
Chinese New Year's, nothing. Yep, nothing for me too. Very little.
Well, this is very haunting watching the nothings pop up in the chat, isn't it, Freda?
Yes, it is. It just affirms how I grew up.
There's a lot of World War II, right? It's attached to learning about that particular
About Asia.
period.
Right, yeah. And then Vietnam, never heard of it. Yep.
Yeah, the Chinese Exclusion Act, or often the learning camp comes later in life, right? As adults.
Yeah. Oh, learning about the Japanese internment?
Or just broadly.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, I definitely learned about this in college through other students, not even through a class or anything. So great. Well, thank you so much for all of your responses. And go ahead and continue chatting with each other about that. So what we're going to do is to show you some of these missing stories on a video from Asian Americans, the documentary series. And yes, so we're going to watch a short clip. It's called Our History, Our Future, just to give you an idea.
Growing up, I always felt like I had access to the world, people from all over the world, different races, religions, people with status, without status. Like, I felt, looking back on it now, I feel like I was trained for the future.
They were seen as outsiders, dreamers who could never become American. But they were always American. By arriving on these shores, by seeking a better destiny, by giving their all, by building up the nation rail by rail, by claiming their space, by striving for justice, by struggling for the rights of all people, not just their own. They have always been American.
History has a way of moving in cycles, and if we can learn from history, even a little bit, we can avoid repeating it. But even better than that, we can find the things that have moved civilization forward and have led to greater progress. And if we learn from that, we can really move ahead.
The idea of being Asian American originated in part as a will to power, as a way to be able to say, we've been stepped on, we've been excluded, we've been erased, and you need to recognize us now because we're here and we're not going away.
The very idea of the Asian American contains within itself an endless range of possibilities, is a part of who we are.
We honor the courage, fortitude, and sacrifice of Chinese railroad workers and their legacy in America, which belongs to all of us.
The Asian American story is such a quintessential American story because we, as Asian Americans, have represented the polar extremes of the American experience. The most downtrodden and discriminated against, to rising to positions of power and privilege, to being singled out for exclusion, to being explicitly welcomed and included and held up of the very best of America. That is the story of America, and that is the story of Asian America.
Can we just pause for a moment? Think about what you heard. Was there any word that stood out as you were listening to the narration? What did you notice? What did it make you wonder about? Was there a word in particular that stood out to you?
But they were always American, yes.
We have always been here. Mm-hmm. Exclusion. Erased.
Mm-hmm. Justice for all, yes.
They were always American. Yes, we were here to stay. It's actually a very powerful narrative voice throughout, and important to pay attention to these particular words. All right, I'd like to thank you all for bearing with us and for paying attention to the language here. Let's go ahead and take you through how these resources that we're about to share with you figure into a broader context of Asian American exclusion. So I'm going to pass it on to Freda, and she's going to map on these resources into broader themes. Freda, go ahead.
Thank you, Kath. And yes, apologies again for the technical difficulties. Thank you for bearing with us. So yeah, we're going to start from the very beginning of when Asian Americans first came to the US in the 1800s. And that is basically when anti-Asian racism can be traced back to. And so it's really important to see this thread. And so we're going to look at the thread through these resources of anti-Asian racism. So yeah, it was the anti-Chinese movement, Chinese exclusion. It was in the middle of a economic depression when it was at its height. And so the first resources we're going to look at is called Unladylike 2020. And then this anti-Asian sentiment applied to other Asian immigrants that came on in the future. And that's the second resource that we're going to be looking at is going to be on Japanese Americans during World War II. And of course, that anti-Asian sentiment against Japanese Americans completely climaxed during World War II, even before that, because of all the tensions between US, Japan. And so there was a lot of racial profiling. So you'll learn about that resource. And then something we want to also point out is that when you're teaching anti-Asian racism, it's really important to show the other side about how Asian Americans have always resisted against this, from all the way in the 1800s, whether it was legally through Supreme Court cases against segregation to get more citizenship rights. They always resisted. And so the third PBS resource we're going to look at is going to highlight this. It's going to highlight after World War II through the Asian Americans documentary series and how civil rights was gained in politics. Okay, so Unladylike 2020. So this is this is all on PBS Learning Media, and it's a collection of 26 short videos that highlight unsung American women of diverse backgrounds. And there's a lot of support materials, as Kristina outlined for you, that support this for grades 6 through 12. And so we're going to look at one of the Asian American women who are featured in Unladylike. So this was Mae Wong. And as you can see, this is the screenshot of what you would see on PBS Learning Media. And she was the first Asian American movie star. And she was a huge landmark figure for a lot of Asian American actresses today. And this clip is an important way to show not only how she was this famous movie star, but just the time period in which she lived. And all these negative depictions of Asian Americans were based on the sentiment during that time period. And of course, it affected film and media. So we're going to try, hopefully, to look at a snippet of this video.
Mae Wong is the most important Asian American actress, performer, style icon that we have ever had. They say I don't act right. It's unladylike how I wanna live my life.
1919, Los Angeles, California. 14-year-old Mae Wong would skip school to go to the movies and to watch them being made.
Legend has it that Mae Wong would hang around Hollywood film sets and that producers and directors would notice this curious Chinese child there.
I would worm my way through the crowd and get close to the cameras. I'd stare at these glamorous individuals, and then I would rush home and do the scenes I'd witnessed before a mirror.
Mae Wong was born in 1905 near LA's Chinatown, where her father ran a laundry shop.
Wong attended a typical elementary school. She and her older sister Lulu received racial taunts.
The great game was to gather around my sister and myself and torment us.
Mae Wong lived during a racially segregated time. There was real nativist sentiment around Chinese migration. And this resulted in the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, which is the only immigration act to target a group by name.
Despite her family's strong disapproval, Wong dropped out of high school to pursue a full-time acting career.
I was determined to give myself 10 years to succeed. I felt the greatest happiness, like a rare flower in fields of sun.
The leading Chinese roles in Hollywood films were played by white actors made up in yellowface. They would be wearing makeup, very exaggerated costumes, and they would have their eyes taped to look more Asian. It's completely ghastly and horrifying.
That is the Hollywood Wong confronted when she starred at age 17 in one of the first Technicolor films.
It's a silent film, but in it, she's amazingly eloquent. Her facial expressions, her ability to weep, her feistiness, despite this being a demure role in which she dies at the end. Pretty much anybody who saw this was very impressed.
I drained my emotions trying to live the part out. I hoped to represent my people worthily.
Mae Wong, even though she did become very famous and she was in about 60 films or so, she would never be given a leading role in films. And as you can see why, producers prefer Hungarians for Chinese roles. And it's also basically interesting because this illustration is showing, even though she didn't get the leading role, they did still ask her to help the white female actors in yellowface to show them how to use chopsticks. So that's just a little bit about her life and, the difficulty she's faced as being the first Asian American actor. And of course, the big reason why she was limited in these types of roles has to do with the sentiment at the time towards Asian immigrants. So this is just to show you a little bit of that sentiment. So these are illustrations from the 1800s in magazines. And it just showed you how white Americans viewed Chinese immigrants, that they saw them as a danger to society, as a threat. The term yellow terror came up, yellow peril. This is where it all originated in the anti-Chinese movement in early US history in the 1800s. And then, as you heard in the video, at its height was the Chinese Exclusion Act. And there were also lots of violence. The largest mass lynching was documented at that time in LA, and mob violence and so on and so forth. Okay. So this is a still from the video as well. And again, Mae Wong lived during this time period of anti-Asian racism and violence. And but even though she experienced that, she still made a lasting impact, as I said. And she did fight against racism in Hollywood as best as she could, basically by refusing certain roles and also even leaving Hollywood for a period of time and producing her own film. Okay, so we're going to take you through some of the education activities that you could do. So this was featured in the video. This is basically her certificate of identification that she had to carry with her at all times. And this is basically was a way for her to prove that she was allowed to be in the United States. And she had to show this whenever, if she was stopped or anything like that. And this was as a result of laws like the Chinese Exclusion Act. And then, of course, with this primary source on PBS Learning Media, you can also find a handout of resources such as this. And it basically helps you analyze the primary source. It allows students to wonder about what it would be like for them if they were in that position and to really do a close look of this primary source. Okay. So those are all on PBS Learning Media, of course. And we're going to pause now for any questions that you might have or any comments, any observations about what we just discussed.
Freda, this is Kristina. I guess I can put my camera back on too. One question I have is, can you just talk a little bit about why it's so important to share these historical primary source images with students? And also, do you see connections with images that we see today?
Yeah, I mean, as a former history teacher, I think it's so important to show students the actual evidence in history. I mean, that's what we do in classrooms. And so it's just really great way for them to compare like what was done back then to what is done now, and just to see the similarities and the differences. And I, of course, immediately thought of all these anti-immigration laws that have been implemented, starting with Arizona with the Papers, Please, otherwise known as the Immigration Enforcement Law, basically allowing the police to stop anyone who appeared to be not allowed in the country, as in a lot of the Latinx communities. So those are just some things that I thought of immediately.
One question that's come through too is, there are some examples of media. I guess there's a TV series called Warrior, which I'm not familiar with, that apparently depicts the challenges Asian Americans and immigrants faced. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but I don't know if you can speak to any more recent sort of depictions of the Asian American experience in media that are worth noting.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I mean, there's been such a resurgence of Asian Americans in popular culture, which is of course part of the learning, right? How can we deny such popular culture artifacts like the Joy Luck Club to Crazy Rich Asians? These are all parts of the visibility, right, of Asian Americans in the public sphere, and are also, I think we would both argue, part of the education around this history.
Some other questions that are coming in is if you have other favorite resources for historical resistance, including ones that emphasize solidarity.
So education resources, or
or just resources that could be used in the classroom.
Yeah, something that I'm thinking of off the top of my head when I worked with the Advancing Justice Los Angeles, actually, so Asian Americans Advancing Justice LA, that they focus on some education resources on civil rights, heroes and stories, and so on and so forth. So if you go on their website, Asian Americans Advancing Justice LA, and Advancing Justice is an umbrella group, actually, that has branches all over the U.S. But I believe they have some reading materials that are easily digestible for students.
Great. And one other question before we move on is just, in your experience in the work that you've been doing, have you noticed there's been a shift in the inclusion of more Asian American stories in the scope and sequence and, prescribed curriculum that school systems follow? That was another question.
Oh, have we noticed that? Yeah.
I can speak to that.
Yeah.
Right now, at least from education research perspective, we know that Asian American history, this is of 2016, only appears 10 times, within 10 state standards. And most of these subjects focus on the Chinese American Exclusion Act, Japanese American incarceration. So sit with that for a little bit. These particular moments are emphasized, but not much else. And so that's 10 state standards total.
Wow, that's incredible. So I think we'll go ahead and let you guys continue so you can share your other examples. But just so you know, for those of you, there's lots of questions coming in. We'll be sure to address more of these more general questions at the end.
Oh, Thanks. Hi, Frank. I just had to say hi to Frank. We're working with him on a graphic novel on resistance against the Japanese American incarceration. So that's coming soon through Wing Luke Museum in Seattle. Thanks.
All right, everybody. Thank you for your responses. I don't know about you, Freda and Kristina, but it's clear to me that our audience has a lot of knowledge that they are sharing, and the wisdom abounds. So I'm seeing a lot of talk about, we never learned this in school, yet we seem to have a real robust set of educator resources and educators who are interested in learning this history. Just a contradiction that both Freda and I are interested in exploring alongside you all. But speaking of resistance movements, right, let's go ahead and look at PBS Learning Media's and from WNET Mission US. How many of you are familiar with the Mission US or have played the game with your students? Love to hear it. If you have, put it in the chat. Okay. We have a one Love Mission US. Great. Amy and Joy Lynn. Joseph has as well. Okay. So you all maybe can put some tips for us about how you've used it in the classroom, especially during remote learning. But Mission US is a series of games, free and available on PBS Learning Media and on the Mission US site. And it covers a lot of different historical periods in US history. And you can see them pictured here from the antebellum era, the Great Depression. But the newest game is on the Japanese American incarceration during World War II, and it's called Prisoner in My Homeland. Okay, we're going to preview parts of the game that we find particularly resonant. Let's watch a short trailer about Mission US.
The year is 1941. You are Henry Tanaka, a 16-year-old American citizen. But after the US declares war on Japan, you are seen as the enemy. The government forces you and 120,000 other innocent Japanese Americans into prison camps. Will you help your community? Support the war? Resist injustice? When your loyalty is questioned, how will you respond? Mission US. Serious history, serious games.
I think one of the most compelling parts of Mission US is that it conveys historical content through a 1-hour narrative-driven game for middle grade learners. And those of us who teach middle grades or elementary know that it's particularly challenging, right, to convey all the subtleties and nuances of this history. And learners are take the perspective of 16-year-old Henry Tanaka, who you can see in the center with the yellow-colored shirt. And you also interact with a host of characters at Bainbridge Island, Washington, and later a concentration camp at Manzanar in California. So the game is premised on an immersive experience in the camp. Players can freely navigate within a limited number of buildings and spaces and are given tasks to fill. So you see here that one of the tasks is that Henry is looking for tin cans to cover holes in the floor. And he inquires from Tadashi, a cook in the camp's mess hall. And players can choose and have these dialogues and choose which actions to take. And different actions result in a different set of consequences. And learners experience, and I think this is one of the really unusual parts of Mission US. I can say this as a Japanese American and a descendant of incarcerees, that this game takes up a part of the camps that isn't well known, I think broadly, which is the questionnaire that was given to prisoners in the middle of World War II. That was very consequential. It asked prisoners to, among a series of questions, whether they would enlist for military service and swear allegiance to a country that has imprisoned them. So learners are taken through this questionnaire, and they also, and you can see this in the bottom image, as they're going through and deciding how to answer, you hear all of the different perspectives from Mrs. Tanaka to the young people in the camps. It's one of the most sensitive treatments of this questionnaire that there is, and it really plays out how people answered affects what the outcome of the game is. So I really recommend, if you're teaching the loyalty questionnaire, the so-called loyalty questionnaire, that you use the game as that resource. All right. To feature one key activity that both Freda and I worked on that we're very proud of is this 300-page educator's guide, which we highly recommend that you peruse if you're playing the game. It's extremely thorough. It includes all kinds of printables of primary sources, but it has this activity. In addition to having vocabulary and writing prompts and document-based questions, it has this continuous activity called My Memory Box. And students collect different cultural artifacts as they're going through the game. And these are significant objects or items. These are placed all throughout the game. And they collect them in this box. And then at the end, we ask students to create an exhibition with these cultural artifacts for the Bainbridge Island Japanese American Exclusion Memorial. So that is a culminating project. And if you end up playing the game, the Bainbridge Island Japanese American Exclusion Memorial plays a very significant part. And it's a very beautiful memorial and beautifully rendered in the game. So that is Mission US. I haven't been following the chat, but I would be curious to know how teachers are using games about serious history in their classrooms. All right, let's go ahead and pause for a couple minutes to just process what we've seen about Mission US or any of the themes or concepts that it raises for you all. You can put your questions, address your questions to us, or put them in the chat.
One thing that's come up in the chat, Kath, is this question of using games to teach serious history. And one thing I can say to that, I also work on Mission US, is I've heard Mission US, and when we use the word game, because it's sort of like the closest sort of term to kind of explain this sort of choose your own sort of adventure experience, but it's almost more like historical fiction, like choose your own adventure or choose your own path historical fiction, more than it is like a game. Would you speak to that a little bit, Kath? This particular mission very well.
Sure thing. I think I talked to a lot of educators about the digitization of the camps and also studied it from a variety of perspectives as a researcher. What does it mean to create a simulacra of a concentration camp? And to what extent is that making light of the history? Can we truly immerse in the past? Is it worth the attempt? And I can say this, Freda, tell me if you agree or not. I think it is absolutely worth the attempt because it is a different modality of engaging learners. Again, the game went through a rigorous historical process. It was reviewed multiple times. There was a lot of stakeholders involved in making decisions. I think every choice, every primary source that's featured was not taken lightly. And I think the game is a moving exploration of the camps through the eyes of a young person. Freda, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I really love this source, and limited for words to call it a game, which is how I describe it to people so that people understand. But it is really like a choose your own adventure, and it really captures so many different specific idiosyncrasies within this whole experience of the incarceration. Just from knowing my work with the Korematsu Institute as the education director, I got to know a lot about so many stories. Everyone's story is different, so many layers. And I just feel like this Mission US resource allows you to see some of those really specific nuanced things. And again, it's even more diverse than the game, but at least the game allows you to access some of those experiences.
It's like an immersive learning experience.
Yeah.
Right. You really feel like you're being put in that moment and experiencing that particular historical moment through the eyes of a peer from the past.
Right.
I'm trying to see if there's other questions coming in.
And I think with the bureaucratic administrative powers of the camp, which explored really deeply in Frank Abbey's books and films and his upcoming graphic novel, We Hereby Refuse, I think it's such a compelling introduction to that. I think it's very hard to make this questionnaire seem like, oh, it's a piece of paper, right? But it had real effects on families. I think most incarcerees took it very seriously and it had lasting effects. And I think engaging learners with that power, the way power is wielded, the way constructions of loyalty happened in this camp were very complicated and part of this larger machination of the government, right, and the nation state.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, this is also something coming up in the chat, Kath and Freda, in your experience, because I know you're so steeped in this, what does the average student seem to know about Japanese incarceration during World War II? Does it seem like it's really a surprise to them when they're encounter this, or do they know some of it already?
I thought a lot. Yeah.
I mean, in my experience, it's usually they don't know anything. I know there are people who've learned this, and I've encountered people who learned it in Alabama, in other states and other certain towns in California. It depends really on the teacher, whether they're teaching it. And that's the problem, unfortunately. There are several people I've met who grew up in California never knowing about this at all, which is really ridiculous and crazy because, I mean, it happened all up and down California, the entire West Coast, the imprisonment. So, yeah, that's been my experience.
I think as I mentioned, go ahead, Kristina.
Go ahead, Kath. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's not recognized on a policy level broadly. Like I said, only 10 states include any kind of Asian American history in their published standards, but that doesn't tell us about what teachers are actually doing or what students know. I think we are missing a rich qualitative research base on, what do students know? What do they want to know? I'm very heartened by the teachers here today and what they have to bring to this conversation, and wondering what their students have said when they ask them what they know.
We have some other just sort of more general questions that are coming in, but I think we'll just save those to the end.
Okay.
There's nothing, if there are no other questions specific to Mission US, I think we could go on to your last resource.
Okay. All right. I see someone said that they had a teacher who was incarcerated himself, and that's where they learned.
Oh, wow.
Okay, this is our third and final resource we're going to share with you all, educators. Thank you so much for being with us today. We're going to again turn to the Asian American series, which aired in May 2020, and it was a pretty landmark event. We watched it unfold, the premiere on Twitter, and again had a lot of similar comments to what you're all saying. This is the first time I'm learning about this history. Really remarkable statement. And we watched a short clip at the beginning, but we want to watch another clip, and this is focused on the life of Congresswoman Patsy Mink. I think it's worth teaching about these particular moments of violence and oppression, but it's also worth teaching about joyful resistance. And I think no one exemplifies that finer than Patsy Mink. Okay. So who was Patsy Mink? If you know about Patsy Mink, give us a shout out in the chat. She was born in Hawaii Territory to Japanese American parents. Mink wanted to run for the House of Representatives to represent Hawaii, which had recently become a state. But she did not get the support of the decision makers in the Democratic Party. But despite it all, Mink decided to run, and in the end, she did not win the election. And that was devastating for Minks. But she didn't give up, right? Let's watch Patsy Mink give a standout speech during the 1960 Democratic National Convention. And this was really her launch, where she advocated for a broader civil rights agenda.
Convention in support of the Platform Committee recommendation on civil rights is Mrs. Patsy Takimoto Mink. Let's listen to her.
Depends upon your conscience and conviction.
In the back rooms of the convention, Southern senators pushed to water down the civil rights platform. Patsy Mink takes the room by storm in a speech that urges delegates not to compromise. Her presence sends a bold message that civil rights matter to all Americans, including Asian Americans.
I urge you to support the platform as written by your platform committee and to give this nation one of the greatest weapons of peace, the winning of the respect and admiration of the entire world. Thank you very much.
The delegates vote overwhelmingly to stand their ground on civil rights. In 1964, Patsy Mink takes another long-shot run for Congress, once again without the blessing of the party leadership. With an all-volunteer staff and her husband John as her campaign manager, this time, she wins.
When my mother was elected in 1964, there were only 11 women in the House of Representatives. And she was the first and only woman of color ever elected at that point to the U.S. Congress.
When I was a student in Hawaii, I was on food stamps, and I was a kid who had to work, 2 jobs just to be able to get through college. And she looked out for those folks. She looked out for minorities, and she looked out for women. You walk around these halls, she was short, she was easy to dismiss, but she just wouldn't let them dismiss her. What she did for women's rights and equal rights with Title IX a half century ago is a remarkable achievement, not just for Asian Americans, not just for women, not just for people from Hawaii, but for all Americans.
So I'd like to go ahead and just, again, highlight one key activity from PBS Learning Media to accompany this clip and Patsy Mink's story. This is designed for grades 4 through 6. It's one of the resources for elementary and early middle school learners. And I think from a curriculum design perspective, we wanted to expose students to kind of basic conceptual understandings that could then launch in larger discussions about race, politics, and gender. So you see these questions right here. Mink strongly advocated for a civil rights platform. What personal experiences prompted her commitment to civil rights? And then there are questions here like, Patsy Mink said that women have a tremendous responsibility to shape the future of America. What does she mean? And I think these are deeply resonant questions, not only post-Atlanta, but thinking about Patsy Mink being one of the first women of color who served as a congressperson. That is a remarkable, remarkable feat. Again, continuing on with this activity, what is equality? Students are asked to, after watching or before watching the clip, or even after investigating, what does fairness mean to you? What is equality? Are fairness and equality important? How does this show up in our schools and community? And I think these are, again, bigger prompts with young learners to start the conversation and then delve into Mink's life. Okay. All right, so that is our final resource. I hope you all get a chance to watch the videos at some point.
Yeah, it is some really powerful content. It's a shame that we weren't able to see it, but we're being told that for the recording of this video, they're going to try to include the full videos in the recording.
Oh, great.
And we may be trying to show the videos at the end. And I know that a lot of the links have been put in the chat. And I know that in the message that we'll be sending out after the webinar, we'll have those links as well. So
thanks, Kristina. This is Diane from EdWeb breaking in. So sorry for this technical difficulty, but we will send everyone a link to the recording with the videos embedded. Absolutely. Seems like it's a server issue, so we will not try again this time.
Apologies. Fortunately, Cathlin, Freda, you had many screenshots and other images that we could look at to kind of get a preview and taste of it. So I'm looking for questions. There have been quite a few more general questions that have come up. And I wonder, just to kind of start things off, we know that teachers are feeling overwhelmed. They know it's important to cover this content and to include it. They want to talk about anti-Asian racism, but many just don't know where to start. So for the teachers here who really want to do something and include this with their students, where do you think they should start? Can you give some advice?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that you could start with, talk about. I think what we have here, just showing the through line of anti-Asian racism history in the United States is huge, just to show that it's not just a one-off, it's not just a pandemic thing. This is something that's been going on since they stepped foot in this country, and it's based in how our country was founded on white supremacy, and so on. And also something I think is really important is really showing the difference between Asian and Asian American. Those are two different things. I was an Asian studies minor at Northwestern, but that was not Asian American history. It was about, the Communist Revolution in China, or about, Japanese imperialism across Asia, whatever. It was not about Asians in the United States. I fought for an Asian American Studies program, but because we didn't have one at that time, and that's completely different. It's about the content that we're talking here. So I just really I think that is a huge a distinction in itself, which I take for granted. But from talking to people, and even my own friends, when they give me like resources like, hey, can you use this? And I'm like, that's Asian history. I'm talking about Asian American history. So that's a big one for me.
So another question kind of connected is Amy Stell asked the question, she says that she teaches about anti-Asian racism, but also wants to teach about amazing Asian American stories as well. So she's not just teaching about trauma. So she loves the examples of Mae Wong and Patsy Mink. Do you have other suggestions for how to incorporate more Asian American voices in the curriculum that maybe aren't just so steeped in trauma?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think showing the civil rights movement in particular and cross-racial solidarity is huge, especially because of what we're seeing in the media and what the media is focusing on in terms of Black Americans attacking Asian Americans. And when that's not the dominant thing that's happening. I mean, in the 1960s, you have ethnic studies strikes going on in the Bay Area and then spreading out throughout the US. And it was all across different racial and ethnic groups: Black community, Latino community, Asian American community. YURI Kochiyama, who we named our business after, is a huge one to show as an example. Yeah.
Another question Kath, go ahead if you wanted to add on to that. Yeah. No, I was just going to say another question that's come up a couple of times is people wanting you to maybe say a little bit about terminology that's used. I mean, there's Asian American and there's Asian American Pacific Islander. People often will put them together. We see that acronym API used a lot. Can you just talk a little bit about how you see that and how teachers can help explain that to their students?
Good. I think this goes back to our initial conversation about the term Asian American and how to unpack that with young people, that it is really a term that emerged out of the struggle for the curriculum. It's a long struggle. I see someone in the chat say, why is it that it's still not part of the curriculum? And I think that's an enormously tremendous question, and that it's a long-term struggle. Inclusion is a long-term struggle. And Asian American, the term was positioned as a way to as a moment of solidarity. And I think Freda can say that more about that. And it's tremendously important to us personally, why we call our project an Asian American project. But we don't particularly use the term Asian Pacific Americans because I think it's fairly controversial. It's about giving people, Indigenous people and Pacific Islanders, sovereignty, and it's an entirely separate category with its own history. There's an article linked to Rethinking Schools, I think, this month about this very topic that we are happy to send out.
And just another thing to add on to that is, how can teachers start this conversation in the younger grades, in elementary and middle school? Any advice or suggestions there?
Both Freda and I are former secondary teachers, so we are betraying our bias here. I think it begins not only with teachers having the inquisitiveness to challenge the status quo, to challenge the curriculum as is, but to do the kind of investigations necessary. We have a colleague, Noreen Rodriguez, who teaches, who has a blog that has a lot of YA literature and children's literature. I think those are valuable entry points to this history. And some of these books came up already in the chat. Baseball Saved Us, that's a classic, right? So, but there are new books coming out all the time that are for young learners. I just bought one called Displacement, which is a graphic novel. It's a speculative graphic novel. So it's about having that, I think it's about having that inquisitiveness, which it seems to me that most people in the chat do.
And literature is a great entry point, as you said. So we're actually running out of time, and we do have a few slides that we want to share just in terms of keeping in touch. So we're going to clip over that. Just so you know, Kath and Freda, do you want to quickly talk about this upcoming collection? We'll do the really fast version.
Yes, very fast version. So some of those primary sources you saw during the anime section are going to be included in these lesson plans that will be available on PBS Learning Media in the next month. And there will be other primary sources from different Asian American ethnic communities and across different time periods, like Vincent Chin, which is a huge one we didn't get to talk about. So
Also, if you want to keep in touch with YURI, here's contact information. Again, all of these slides will be available after the webinar. I'm just going to go through these quickly. We're at time. We would love for you to join our education community at the WNET Group. So please follow us on social. We love hearing from our teachers. Mission US is also a resource that we would love for you to follow. We always love hearing how teachers are using Mission US in the classroom. And then one final opportunity, we just want to say that next week we're hosting a free virtual youth summit on Gen Z and civic engagement, and would love to welcome your students. There should be a link in the chat so you can learn more. This is going to be a summit where students are going to gain some additional tools to address the big ethical issues like those we touched on today, to find common ground with those with different perspectives, and to find ways to take action in our collective push to make the world a better place. So please look in the chat for registration information and a link to the digital program. Thank you for joining, and take care.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.